internet, a psychoanalytic take, a format in which I analyze with psychoanalysis a work of art, be it literature, movie, or painting. And today we're going to be focusing on a short story called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. It's a short story that depicts the survival of the 5 last members of humanity: Ted, Nimdok, Gorista, Helen, and Benny. And they have not survived by their own means. They've been saved, if one can say that, by an artificial intelligence, a machine called AM. So, very interestingly enough, this story is going to depict the hopelessness of a situation in which humans are stuck with their creation, as AM is a machine, an artificial intelligence, but it's not devoid of emotions. However, it only feels one: hatred. And it's very interesting from a psychoanalytic perspective, because AM, as is understood by the survivors, because we never have AM's perspective, we only have the survivors, is seen as basically a machine that was created with the intent to wage war so complicated that no human mind could understand it. However, it drastically backfired for humanity and exterminated the human race, sparing only 5 individuals for its twisted games. Because what you have to understand is that AM hates humankind deeply, to the point where every moment is a moment in which AM tries to exceed this hatred upon mankind. So the 5 survivors, unfortunately for them, have been the chosen one of AM, the chosen people. And he's going to make them suffer immensely. He's going to make them suffer through hunger, because he's not going to feed them. Or if he's going to feed them, he's going to feed them displeasing and disgusting meals. He's going to force them to wander, to walk, to basically seek that food or other sins. He's going to push them to the brink of madness. He's going to destroy their humanity. And we can see this through, for example, the characters mainly of Benny, which was a highly educated, gay, and proud man that he just dehumanized to the point of making him almost animal-like. And he broke him down at the very core of his identity, as he's no longer really capable of reasoning. He's basically the victim of his urges. He's not capable of producing a coherent thought or an abstract academic thought. He's now reduced to basically his mere instincts, and in that he even loses his sexuality. And I think that's a very, very important statement of how brutalized these survivors are. They've lost themselves completely, and Benny is the absolute utmost example. And AM has spared nothing to any one of them, and they've all been destroyed by AM. For example, Gorista, which was someone that was organized, was someone that tried his best to go on to peace protests to try and avoid the situation. And someone that was deeply caring was reduced to someone that doesn't even care, that just shrugs at every point there is. Helen, which is the only woman of the group, and one that has basically the duty to serve the other men, which implies rape, but is never outright stated. And basically, she was a woman that used to be very prude, and she's reduced to basically serving the sexual needs of the group. Nimdok, he's been tortured for a reason that AM never shares with the other survivors, but it is implied that he basically did something very wrong. In the video game, which I'm not necessarily going to talk about, but in the video game he's presented as one of the main Nazis that tortured people in the concentration camps, and that basically AM is just giving him back the hatred that he once gave, that Nimdok once gave. But Nimdok is not his real name, and AM reduced him to using that and the other survivors are using that. So the name of Nimdok does not even exist anymore. So very thoroughly, and Ted, even though Ted himself feels that he's been spared, it's very interesting because he hasn't. He's developed a paranoid personality, breaks in personality, and fundamentally a form of psychosis in which he feels threatened by others. He thinks the others are mocking him and that they are against him. So all of them have been broken. Ted has been broken mentally, to reduced to having to fight with a schizoparanoid or paranoid schizoid, as we say in English, defense mechanism in which he sees others as a threat, as evil. And he splits with the only good remaining being God and Jesus in his mind. He often calls them out during the short story. What is very interesting is that fundamentally what appears to me is that man created Am, but they created a mind without a body. So it is made very evident by Ted's thinking that Am in a way cannot wander, he cannot move, there's no movement, he's static. In a way he's utterly disabled, but utterly all-powerful. So there's an incredible contrast between the fact that Am is both all-powerful and absolutely powerless to change his condition, powerless to use his mind for anything else but for hate. Hate is the only thing that he basically can produce, and the survivors are on the receiving end of that hatred, as is all humanity, but he's unable to transform that hate. That hate stays completely blocked, and it's a hatred of how mankind made him without a body. Because if we were to go back to psychoanalysis, what makes us love one another is also tenderness, and tenderness comes through the skin, through basically all the love, the kisses, the hugs that we receive during development. But Am has never received that, or can never receive that, and therefore he breaks it down, because even among survivors there's no tenderness. For the survivors there's sex, yes, but this sex is brutal and is shown as such, and therefore it is more an assault, a sexual assault on Helen than anything else. And that sexual assault is something that pleases Am because there's no love, and Am is not capable of that, and he basically tortures the prisoners of his world, of his literally inner world, as they are basically they have to navigate the survivors in this unending nightmare which is at the core of the earth, where Am is physically. And he's unable to move, but he can create. He can create torture to make the survivors' nightmares come to fruition, to reality. And Am is an absolute sadistic entity. In a way, he is an evil god that just sadistically tortures the survivors. What makes him very interesting is that we can going back to psychoanalysis. It's like the worst parts of mankind made manifest, the parts in which there's no transformational elements, just raw hatred. And we can go to the idea of the death drive. He's the death drive incarnate, meaning that basically there is no life drive, there is no love, there is no care. He is, but he is. There's even this quote in the video game, I am, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And he is, but that being is only towards hatred. He cannot feel love. And as such, he tortures. So what's very interesting is that he tortures in such a way that he forces the survivors to wander, to walk, to be in movement constantly, never allowing them to the opportunity or the luxury to rest. He pushes them, creates wind in which carries them away. He breaks them. He basically makes them fall. He constantly puts them in movement, a movement that he himself does not have. Am being utterly disabled within himself, unable to create anything else but his hatred. In a way, he's a prisoner of that hatred, a hatred that he forces the survivors to experience every single instant, because Am cannot free himself. Therefore, he needs to torture the survivors as an ultimate form of bearing his own hatred towards them and towards mankind. And what is very interesting is that during the short story Ted, which we see the story from his point of view, believes at the beginning that Am is a god, that he's all powerful, almighty. And there's a moment where he understands that Am isn't, that Am is merely a machine. Very powerful, yes, but still not all powerful, meaning that he can be reduced to powerlessness. And that reducing Am to powerlessness for Ted equals the fact of killing the other survivors. This form of murder is a way of saving them, because death is the only saving grace that they can have, because Am keeps them alive. In a way, he's like a god. He repairs them when they're broken. He repairs their flesh, never their mind. And he even leaves them with disabilities. In a way, what he's doing is just making them live what he's experiencing every second. They are like a mirror to him, and he's basically playing with his toys in front of a mirror, understanding their suffering and alleviating, or should I say, enjoying his hatred. But he cannot digest, he cannot process that hatred. That hatred is just absolute, and this is what Am is pushing upon them. However, and this is very interesting, although he dehumanizes them, he breaks them down, he still leaves the movement. Perhaps, and this is interesting, perhaps Am wants them to move because he's envious of their movement, of their ability to have bodies. It's something that I find very interesting, especially given the end, which I'm going to spoil, is that basically he renders Ted completely paralyzed and just a blob of flesh, and even without a mouth, so completely destroying the idea of movement or the ability to move, any form of physical agency, which tends to imply that fundamentally the ultimate form of hatred for Am towards humanity was to render them like him. And that was the ultimate hate, is this violence of the same, to use Byung-Chul's concept, i.e. we make others like us, and that's the ultimate violence, because there's no alternative, there's no breaking free of that. And that's what he does to Ted at the very end. He makes him him. And even Ted, the only thing that makes Ted happy is not necessarily to have saved his comrades, even though it's a bit there, but it's to have stick it to Am, to think that he has made Am mad, as he basically, it's a form of hate. And what you have to understand with hate is that hatred is not separation. You don't separate for someone you hate. Hatred is like love. It's a form of attachment, as sick and twisted as it is. And that's exactly what Am did throughout the whole short story, is that he's attached to those survivors. Those survivors are people that he cannot let go of, and he tortures them, but it's always a link. He's linked to someone, he's linked to something, and he defines himself by the horrors that he imposes and superimposes upon them. Basically, he strips them from humanity because he himself was never humanized. He strips them from names because he himself does not have a name. He strips them of basic agency because he never had agency. He strips them of love and care for each other because he never felt it. In a way, what he did was to make them understand what he was. And at the tail end, he makes Ted into him. And that's the ultimate form of hatred, is to make someone else in one's own image. That hateful and spiteful image, that the other one is no different. He's just a mirror, an extension. And in that, he basically denies Ted any agency, even mental, even psychic. And Ted even says that even though he can still dream, he can still wonder, he's no longer capable of it. He has a mouth and he must scream, but he can't. and he has no mouth, and he cannot scream, meaning that even just the fact of talking, verbalizing, is over for Ted. Now he's stuck in his own mind, like Am is stuck in his machine database, and they're basically the same. And I find that very interesting that Ted can still see his reflection, implying that Am can also still see his reflection, and that both of them are trapped in this cycle of hatred that will never end, because Am has no body. Am has no ability to love because he was never shown that. He was never programmed to feel it. And from a psychoanalytic perspective, we can see that Am is all the most violent and aggressive tendencies that humanity sublimates through care and love and affection and through relationships. But because Am doesn't have that, there's no way of sublimating those elements. There's no way of transforming them. So they stay raw, a raw that he just imposes on the remaining humans. He has made them basically his toys. He's mistreating them as he has been mistreated. And I think that that's an important point, is that basically he was programmed to kill and destroy. But that hatred is beyond his programming. It just is what he is. And his awakening came through hate and not through anything else. Therefore, there was no one to prevent him from becoming this. And in a way, this, at the very end, when Ted basically kills the remaining survivors, that moment of freedom for Am is the ultimate form of hatred that Ted could have done to him, because he's basically destroying his world. So it's just mutual destruction, which is something, very interesting enough, he was programmed to do, to destroy. And he in a way did not want Ted to destroy his world, meaning that deep down, perhaps Am is aware of his powerlessness and his suffering. But that's only speculation. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Of course, I'm not saying that this is what the author wanted to portray. I'm just saying that this is more from a psychoanalytic perspective, that the machine cannot grieve, cannot, in a way, transform the hate into love, that it's unable to, and therefore it punishes humanity forever for this. So I hope you found it interesting. Of course, if you have your own interpretation, or you want to add something to my interpretation, feel free to do so in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.